This is really an honor to be speaking with someone of your caliber and just the names on the list. I mean, you know, Snoop Dogg, Ice-T, Dr. Dre. I mean, the list goes on. And yeah, thank you so much for coming in. I'm really excited to dig in.
Well, Soren, as you know, I am a college professor and I've been an educator for 30 years in origins of gangsta rap.
I don't really keep a top 5, but I have my favorite rapper is Schoolly D, and I think the best rapper of all time is LL Cool J. So that way I get to have two, somebody that I love and then someone I do think is the best. And I think LL's the best because he's still putting out music. You know, he just put out a song with Rick Ross and Fat Joe that people may or may not have heard that Q-Tip produced. But the reality is LL Cool J coming out in 1984-85, he has shown at the highest level he can do any style of song. He can not even rhyme on singles and they'd be big songs. He can basically do anything and over any type of beat. And one of the things that I did a big sidebar that's a full page was on It's Getting Funky Enough by the DOC. So I wanted to put that in the History of Gangsta Rap because Snoop, of course, is one of the icons of the game, and then the DOC I think doesn't get enough credit or recognition for his work with basically the early Ruthless Records releases, as well as then Death Row, of course, and subsequently with the Aftermath. But yes, I'm always looking at ways to write better, to think better, to interview someone better, to think of a question they've never been asked. That's one of the great things that a lot of artists, even ones I interview today, that I either have never interviewed or never met or just have never come across, a lot of them still say to me, and these are dudes that have been making music since the 80s or early 90s, like, man, nobody's ever asked me these questions, man, this is great. And that's something that, you know, keeps me going because I want to learn as much as I can about this stuff and apply it to not only these interviews, but my next round of interviews, my next book.
Welcome to the Apex Lifestyles Podcast. I'm your host, BobgDMD, and I'm here as always with my co-host,
Dennis V. How you doing today, Bob?
Well, we're doing fantastic. We've been busy this week, man.
Real busy week. The weather's warm out here on the East Coast and getting a lot done.
Yeah, you know, we've had a bunch of recordings this week, getting things prepared for the podcast. We've got some other projects, irons in the fire, so to speak, right, Dennis?
Yeah, we sure do.
Yeah, so we're really excited to share some of that. But you know, we've dug deep into the bullpen, so to speak, and we have very honored to have this guest on today. He's a storied journalist, and I'm gonna let Dennis go ahead and take the honors.
Well, as a hip hop historian, and Soren Baker is one of the top journalists in the game. He's written several books, well over 4,000 articles in top publications. Was the editor of The Source, I believe, for 6 years. Is written for Rolling Stone magazine. He has worked, you name the artist, he has worked with that artist. His work is absolutely tremendous. He has his own podcast, which we're going to dig deep into. Soren Baker, welcome to Apex Lifestyles.
Yeah, well, Dennis and Bob, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for getting on with us. We really appreciate it. And this is really an honor to be speaking with someone of your caliber and just the names on the list. I mean, you know, Snoop Dogg, Ice-T, Dr. Dre. I mean, the list goes on. And yeah, thank you so much for coming in. I'm really excited to dig in.
Well, Soren, as you know, I am a college professor and I've been an educator for 30 years in origins of gangsta rap.
Yes.
That must have been a tremendous. First of all, I read with my students. I've read it with several classes over the years, and we are going to get you to talk to them. That we got to dial you in because they wouldn't believe the conversations that you've had. What was it like doing that book in just connecting and pulling these pieces together? What was the process like?
Well, the History of Gangsta Rap was something that came to me because I did a radio show with Exhibit called Open Bar Radio on K-Day several years ago. And while I was on it, George Hinojosa, who's Ice-T's manager, who I know, was listening to one of the episodes that Exhibit and I did. And he called me up after a day or two afterwards, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Soren, how come you're not doing all these books, man? Yeah, you're on the radio. Yeah, you write articles, but why aren't you doing these books?" And okay. So the reason I got the History of Gangsta Rap is I co-hosted a radio show with Exhibit on 93.5 KDA in Los Angeles called Open Bar Radio, and George Hinojosa, who's Ice-T's manager, heard an episode, and he called me up a day or two after one of the episodes, and he was like, "Hey, Soren, I know you're on the radio with Exhibit. I know you've written all these articles, you've known Ice, you've known me for all these years, but how come you're not writing more books? You need to be the one writing these books, man." And I said, "You know what, George, I agree with you." I said, "But I've had one book out through a major publisher. I've had a number of other ones stall at the finish line, or, people said they were going to do. So if you want to help me, I would really appreciate it, because that's the thing I need. I need help. I have the ideas, I have the ability, I have the knowledge base, I think." And from there, okay. So I just told George I would love to get your help. And he said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" We came up with 3 ideas, one of which ended up being the History of Gangsta Rap. And then, lo and behold, we got to do the History of Gangsta Rap. So one of them ended up being...
Yeah, I love the cover of that. That's a great cover.
Thank you. And basically, what happened was George knew a publisher and got us in touch, and then I did a proposal. They liked it, and thankfully they agreed to let me do it. And thankfully, because of all the work I've done and the relationship I have with a lot of artists, I did more than 30 original interviews. Dennis, I'm sure if reading it and teaching it, you're familiar with the fact that almost all of the quotes in the book are ones that I got for the book. I didn't do a lot of digging into the archives and what did this person say to this journalist or this writer in this interview. I did almost all of it is me interviewing the people myself, because one, I wanted it to be original for the book to make the book more compelling. And secondly, since I knew almost all the artists, I wanted to make sure that they were talking to me and knew it was for this book. And thankfully, I was able to do that. And I think really show that, yes, the West Coast is where it's most synonymous from, but it started in Philadelphia with Schoolie D, migrated to the West Coast. It also existed in New York with Boogie Down Productions and Just Ice to a lot of people, and even Kool G Rap. And we have all these other iterations in Chicago and different cities, and Houston in particular. But I really wanted to show the history, the trajectory of it, and why it's so valuable and why it's so important.
Was there something that you learned throughout your interviews and doing the book that you didn't know that you were like, wow?
Well, yes, there's several things, because the way that I always approach it, interviewing artists and talking to them, and some of them I've known, for decades now. But the main thing is I always think of, what do I want to know as a fan? And one of the things that I did a big sidebar that's a full page was on It's Getting Funky Enough by the DOC. He starts at 1 and then comes at 2 to 3 and 4. And on Nothing But a G Thing, Snoop says a very similar thing. So when I interviewed the DOC for the book, because I knew he wrote his own song and then he helped Snoop with the writing, I asked him about how and why there was that parallel on those 2 songs. I'd never seen the DOC or Snoop, for that matter, discuss that. So I wanted to put that in the History of Gangsta Rap, because Snoop, of course, is one of the icons of the game. And then the DOC, I think, doesn't get enough credit or recognition for his work with basically the early Ruthless Records releases, as well as then Death Row, of course, and subsequently with Aftermath. So to me, that type of thing, if you're paying attention and you're familiar with those 2 songs, even if you never put that together, the goal and the hope and my desire is that when you read the History of Gangsta Rap, you can think like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. These 2 guys, or these 2 songs are tied together, and I didn't know that. So that's, one of the many examples, and DOC gives me a great interview, and we put a lot of information up about that in the sidebar, which I think turned out really well.
When you're talking to these artists, you're talking over 30 interviews they have with different artists. Is it difficult to capture their voice when you do that? When you have 30 different voices and you're trying to tie it into one book where you're basically doing the whole history, is that a difficult thing to do?
Fortunately for me, it wasn't, because this is something I've been doing as a writer since I started in the early 1990s or mid 1990s, I should say. So I've always tried to really make it. Some people didn't like this with my writing, but I always try to make it the artist's voice more than my voice if I'm doing an article or a book, because as much as some people know me and like me, they're there because they want to read what Snoop said or what the DOC said or what Juicy J said or Gucci Mane said. I'm less of a factor. So for me as a reader, I always, took that approach and wanted to make it to where
that's incredible.
The words and the knowledge from the artist, and I'm just a vehicle to that. And when I'm writing something like the History of Gangsta Rap, I put it in the context so it makes sense, and I'm illustrating and weaving everything in and out. But you're really hearing what Snoop Dogg thinks, what Ice-T thinks, what MC Ren thinks, what DJ Quick thinks, what MC8 thinks, what the game thinks. And to me, that's what one of the reasons why I think the History of Gangsta Rap came out well.
It's an absolutely tremendous book, and as I say, it's an educational journey, and I love utilize with my students, and you do great work, and that leads into your next project, Gucci Mane.
Yeah, the Gucci Mane Guide to Greatness.
Gucci Mane?
That was crazy because we did that book entirely during the pandemic. So Gucci Mane Guide to Greatness, right there. The crazy thing is, because it was during the pandemic and because we started it at the beginning of the pandemic, we did it all over the phone because there was so much uncertainty as to what was happening in society with COVID, with traveling. He's not based in Los Angeles. I am. So it was kind of what are we going to do now that we have this book deal? So it was basically like, well, at least for the time being, let's do it over the phone. And then that's what we ended up having to do. And it came out in October of 2020. So we started it literally right when COVID started happening. And that's the fastest turnaround for any book or anything. We had to flip it. So we started really in earnest in March, and it came out in October, which is relatively unprecedented as far as turnaround time. So we just were like, man, let's just knock it out over the phone. So we talked a few times every week and just made it happen. And it was amazing.
So was that like a 6-month turnaround from the time you started?
Seems like it, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that is super fast. I mean, I'm starting to dip my toes into this realm a little bit, and I'm starting to learn the ropes, and it's a hard thing, man. So yeah, it takes a long time to put this stuff together, for sure. You have so many notable interviews. Who's your biggest standout? Who is your favorite interview that you've had the opportunity to chat it and rip it up with?
I mean, my favorite interview is probably Schoolie D, because he's my favorite rapper. And the great thing is, I was in college. The first time I got to speak with him, it was in '95, and he was putting out one of his albums. And basically, I started writing professionally in '94, and then in '95, I had tracked down who his publicist was at the time. And so I called her up and I said, hey, I want to interview Schoolie D. I have this assignment from Rap Sheet. Shout out to my boy Billy Johnson Jr. for making that happen and possible. And she's like, okay, we'll set it up. So then she just called me one day. She's like, hey, Soren, do you still want to interview Schoolie D? And I was like, of course. She's like, oh, can you talk to him right now? And I was like, sure. So I had no notes. I had nothing. And this is my favorite rapper. So
yeah, but you already had the notes, man. You lived it, right?
So 2.5 hours later, almost 3 hours after, when we're wrapping up the interview, Schoolie D said to me, he goes, man, it's so great. I don't like doing a lot of interviews. I don't do a lot of interviews, but you know so much about me. It's great speaking with you, man. I'm really glad I did this. And for me, listening to him since I was 10 or 11 and for a decade at that point, for him to tell me that, one, he doesn't do a lot of interviews, but he's glad he did it. And then two, how much he enjoyed it and how much I knew and how like, oh man, how did you know that? And at the time, I was like 20, how old was I? 20, I think. Well, so that was, I was young and I was just thrilled and ecstatic to be able to have the opportunity, and then for him to be so excited and so, excited like I was to do the interview. And the fact that he stayed on the phone with me for 2.5 hours led me believe that he was, willing and excited to speak with me as well.
Soren, as we are ending the 50th anniversary of hip hop, who would have thought that 50 years ago it started off as a fad? People thought it would be a fad and it would be come and go as quick, if not quicker, as disco is now the #1 musical genre out there. Do you want to reflect on that? And what have you been doing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of hip hop? And where do you think hip hop goes from here?
Well, I definitely didn't think as a kid growing up that rap would be as ubiquitous as it is now. And that's been a great thing for me because I've been able to, knock on wood, this is my life, to be able to write about it and cover it and emerging in different ways. And it's a dream come true. So I'm, first of all, beyond grateful and excited that it's the way that it is and it's evolved into this commercial and creative juggernaut. I definitely didn't see it getting as big as it is. I did see it growing and developing and continuing to expand because as a child, that's what I saw. And I realized, like, man, this is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people are knowing it. But the reality is that just keeps happening. And it's been happening now for 50 years. And to celebrate it, the good thing is I get to celebrate it every day, basically, because I talk to artists almost every day. I hang out with the artists. I'm friends with them. I know them. I get to listen to the music and talk to them about it. I get to have my YouTube channel, Unique Access Entertainment, where I get to talk about artists in depth about their creative process and their music and their artistry. So for me, I'm very fortunate that every day of my life, I get to celebrate it and get to do, within reason, what I want to do, which is a beautiful thing.
What do you think caused hip hop to explode? Back, we had in the golden era of hip hop, we had EPMD that talked about the crossover. They had the song that came out. And then, I remember in the 80s, it was almost like voodoo if artists were to cross over into the mainstream and, then the mainstream happened. Do you think that's what really caused hip hop to really jump in the commercial market, or what's your thoughts?
Well, I think there are a number of factors that caused rap to get into the commercial market. One, I think initially, of course, and people have made this comparison before, people looked at it as rebel music, like punk music. So there was that against the grain, rebellious mentality. But I think the reality is, and I think people tend to forget, is from 1979 till about 1988, generally speaking, the music was very celebratory, very party-driven, very feel-good. And a lot of people that create rap are not from the best neighborhoods, generally speaking. So it was a form of release, a form of celebration, and a form of, we're going to make it despite the, deplorable conditions of our society and for some of the artists where they grew up. And I think that people ultimately look to music and look to entertainment as an escape from their own reality. So there's a huge swath of the population in the late 70s, as we go throughout the entirety of the 1980s, that wanted to escape or wanted to have fun because through a variety of circumstances, the country was, not helping everyone achieve the equal level of success due to racism, classism, sexism, economic disparities, educational disparities, on and on and on and on. So, escapism is one thing, and rap, generally speaking, I think the most important thing about rap is the music itself, the beat. So on the one hand, you could say it's because they used in the 70s, and as we got into the 80s, they were using the familiar disco riffs, replaying the music. So we were building off of the familiarity of the music they might have heard from their parents, their uncles, their older brothers or sisters. Or once you get into the 80s, it sounded like nothing else. So for me, as I was getting into the music, I love percussion, which I didn't understand or appreciate as a 10-year-old when I was first really getting into rap. But I love the sound of percussion. So rap in 1985, 86, 87 especially is extremely drum driven. I grew up in Maryland, right in between Baltimore and Washington, and I love go-go music from DC, which is even more percussion driven than rap. So I was drawn to the percussion. Then I was drawn to the stories that people like Dana Dane were telling, that the Fat Boys were telling, that Run DMC and Houdini were telling, because I thought they were funny. Curtis Blow with basketball. I played basketball. I was like, oh man, here's a song about things I think about or the players I like. So I could identify and appreciate all these things. And then the sound of scratching was another thing that really drew me in, because I didn't understand or appreciate what scratching was at the time, but I love the sound of it. And I'd never heard anything like that because, of course, it wasn't part of music before rap. So all these different disparate things made it. And I think then you add on, as we get into the late 80s, a lot of the messages that are in the music and the wordplay and the creativity of the styles and the explosion of that. As you get into the 1980s, then it's like, oh, if you want to dance, you can listen to this type of rap. If you want street tales, listen to this type of rap. If you want just good stories, listen to this. If you want sexually explicit, listen to that. If you want pro-black, listen to this. There was this wide range of things. So I think then it started appealing to more and more people and was wider and wider accepted, I think, because more people found something they could identify with it as time went on.
Back, we just had DMC in the studio, and one of the things, Bob is one of the biggest rock and roll fans out there, and we talked about the collaboration across musical genres where Run DMC and we had Walk This Way, and most recently, one of my students was Joyner Lucas. Joyner Lucas is from this area, and Joyner Lucas just had an amazing collaboration cross genres with Jelly Roll. Right. And I think it's great. You know, I love seeing artists collaborate, and those are two great collaborations. Is there a collaboration that you'd love to see cross musical genres? You're setting it up right here.
Well, one thing that I do want to do, but I'd want to participate in it myself, is I really want to executive produce an A&R rap and go-go album, whether that's one rapper working with one band or a collection of go-go artists working with a collection of rappers. But that's one of my life goals, dreams, back to the, hey, if you could do anything you want with all the money in the world, I would make that album or that series of albums. So I'm sending that out in the universe yet again. So hopefully someone will say, hey, Soren, here's a budget, go make it happen.
Soren, back at, I'm going to go back in the 80s because I grew up with Run DMC. Everybody you're talking about, Houdini, Fat Boys. Mm-hmm. When, obviously MTV came out and we actually were able to see these guys for the first time on air. Right. And we were able to put the words to who they were. And during the time when hip hop came out, we're talking, 1 hour a week on the radio is all hip hop. And a lot of times if you have your cassette, the radio's on, you press play, then all of a sudden you had Crush Groove come out. Mm-hmm. You had a movie like that. What do you think that did for hip-hop?
Well, I think all the movies made a huge impact because, to your point, Dennis, the reality is, and it's hard for people to understand or comprehend, that we didn't get to see much or any of the artists on television at all because early on, MTV didn't exist or it wasn't playing rap, and then BET did exist and wasn't playing rap. So there was a lag there, and once these movies started coming out, Crush Groove included, it was like, oh, wait a minute, that's what LL Cool J looks like, that's what Run DMC looks like, that's what Curtis Blow looks like, that's what all these guys look like, that's who Russell Simmons is, and all these people, I see their name on the credits or I hear their songs. And that was a big deal because for someone like me growing up in Maryland, I didn't get, and being young, I didn't get to go to clubs. I wasn't in New York. I didn't know anybody in New York. So I was just hearing the music on the radio stations. And fortunately, where I lived, I got the Baltimore radio stations and the Washington, D.C. radio stations. So it was literally, it only lasted a while, but 7 days a week, there was one station a day between the two cities I could find rap almost every day or every day. Like you said, Dennis, just for maybe an hour, but I knew like I could listen to it on the radio and supplement the little bit of music that I had in my collection at that point. And that was exciting. And in fact, EPMD, I'll never forget, WBAL in Baltimore was an AM station, and they were playing You Gots to Chill. The first time I heard the song was on the radio from that station, but because it was AM, there was a thunderstorm. And with the AM stations at the time, when it's a thunderstorm, the station would go out for while the lightning was striking or the thunder, there would be a little gap. So I knew all the words by the time I saw the video, except those 2 or 3 gaps when the thunder and lightning was happening. So I was like really paying attention to make sure I could learn that, because I knew the whole song because I loved it so much, but I didn't know little passages. So that was fun.
Soren, your top 5 artists, hip hop, where do you rank them? You go into your top 5 ever. Who are they? Hip hop.
I don't really keep a top 5, but I have my favorite rapper is Schoolie D, and I think the best rapper of all time is LL Cool J. So that way I get to have 2, somebody that I love, and then someone I do think is the best. And I think LL's the best because he's still putting out music. You know, he just put out a song with Rick Ross and Fat Joe that people may or may not have heard that Q-Tip produced. But the reality is, LL Cool J coming out in 1984-85, he has shown at the highest level he can do any style of song. He can not even rhyme on singles and they'd be big songs. He can basically do anything, and over any type of beat. He's worked with a myriad of producers, and he's lasted from 1984-85 till 2024 and been somebody that matters. Yes, he hasn't put out as much music lately. I have had the fortune of being in the studio with him relatively recently and heard a lot of material that sadly I'm sure is never going to come out. But the reality is it sounds like LL from 1987, Bigger and Deffer era, or it sounds like Walking with the Panther era. It sounds like LL Cool J from the 80s. So he still has everything that he had back then, and to me he's never fallen off. And I think people could say, oh yeah, of course he's fallen off, but the reality is if he makes a song you don't like, or you don't like love songs, well then you're not going to like him anyway. And did you listen to his album? And the answer is usually no, because when I'll ask people, did you hear these songs from that album? Oh no, well I just heard this. Okay, well you just heard the single. So we're not playing the same game. If we're talking singles, then maybe you would have a different answer. But that's mine.
Yeah, because when he came, you figured Crush Groove, when he came out, and he brought the heat with radio. And then, Mama Said Knock You Out. And then all of a sudden he's doing Love Cuts. I Need Love. And he mastered each one of those hits in a different way that nobody's done in hip hop.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my favorite album of LL Cool J is Bigger and Deffer, but if you look at Mama Said Knock You Out, if you just look at these singles, you have Boomin' System, you have Around the Way Girl, you have Mama Said Knock You Out, you have Illegal Search. And right there, that's 4 songs that are sonically different, stylistically different, subject matters ultimately different. You got a song about girls, you got a song about car stereos, you got a song about bragging, you got a song about police brutality. Like, this is ridiculous that he would have all those singles, all those songs, and be able to do it at such a high level. So I mean, it's pretty remarkable what he was able to do and still is able to do.
Let's talk about your book with Juicy J, released in 2023. That's your newest book. That's
Chronicles of the Juice, man. Thank you very much, Dennis. I appreciate it. I've known Juicy. I first started knowing 3 6 Mafia back in the first time I talked to them was 97 or beginning of 98. I can't remember exactly, but then I went to Memphis to interview them for Rap Pages. Thank you to Alan Gordon and Grace Heck for making that happen. And basically, I just started forming a relationship with 3-6 Mafia. They were working on the Tear the Club Up Thugs album, and I just thought sonically, their production was phenomenal. And I thought, you know, they have 6 members in the group. They got all these different distinct voices. And I just thought that their music was remarkable and that it was on this super upward trajectory, because having listened to their stuff they've been putting out on Selective Hits in particular, Mystic Styles on up, and then later I went and got some of the independent releases before they got the Selective Hits. I just saw this growth and this evolution stylistically. Their choruses got better, their music got better, their production got better, their equipment got better, and they were doing it in a way that I wasn't seeing this dramatic growth in a very concentrated period of time. And I was like, man, this group is on to something. And they had Gangsta Boo bringing in a female perspective, which was also relatively unusual, not unprecedented, but unusual. And so I was just like, man, this is some amazing stuff. So after I had done the Gucci Mane Guide to Greatness, Juicy J's cousin, who I'd met over the years, he just hit me up randomly. Hey, man, would you want to do a book with Juicy J? And I was like, of course. Like, he had forgotten who I was or didn't remember or whatever. And I said, his name is Ray Brady. Shout out to Ray Brady as always. But Ray had said, hey, would you want to do a book on Juice? And I was like, of course. He's one of my favorite artists ever. And I know him. And then Ray was like, hey, that's you, Soren. I was like, yeah, that's me. So then the 3 of us got together and started talking to Juice about it, did a proposal, and very fortunate that was able to happen. Shout out to Hanover Square Press, my agent Robert Kinsler, who made that happen, and Juicy J for believing in me. And, you know, I've done so many articles on 3-6 over the years, with that Rap Pages one being the first. And, you know, it's just one of those things. Like, I believed in them very early, and then Juicy recognized and appreciated that, which I think is how I was able to develop this relationship with both him and DJ Paul and the rest of the group, Gangsta Boo in particular, that it was just amazing that I was able to sustain this relationship with Juicy for so long, and then it manifests in this book.
And you've had quite the celebration on tour. You guys have done quite a few. What's it like being out there with the artist and celebrating the book and watching their fans and the audience gravitate towards it and have conversations about it? That's
immensely rewarding, Dennis, because the reality is we did the main things we did were in New York and Los Angeles at 2 different Barnes and Nobles, and then we've done a few other things. But the reality is to see hundreds of people lining up in Manhattan and in Los Angeles at the Grove, both of the Barnes and Nobles. That was just like amazing, because in 2023 I've been following Juicy since 95, 96-ish. Then to get to know him a couple of years later, and then all, you know, decades later, be able to write a book. And then in 2 cities he's not from, even though, you know, he's immensely popular in both of them, to see this turnout of these rabid fans that are bringing things for Juice to sign, whether it's shirts or vinyl or CDs or what have you. And they're also very excited with the book. And you could tell some of the people had already read the book, so they might have bought it again so he could sign it and take a picture with them. And that's extremely gratifying, because obviously the fans, most of them didn't know who I was, 90% per se, or maybe even more. But some of them came up to me like, you wrote it with Juice, you're Soren Baker. Like, a few knew me. And then it was like, man, Juice and I have really done something amazing, because it's had a significant impact on fans around the country. And the response for the book has been overwhelmingly positive, and Juicy and I, you know, talk about it still to the day. Like, oh man, you know, people still love this book and we're still talking about it. So we got a lot of other things we hope and want to work on together. So fingers crossed those happen as well.
That's all amazing stuff. You know, you've had bylines in like Rolling Stone and BET, ESPN, TV One. Like, how does somebody start in journalism and get their foot in the door and then start to build these relationships with all these artists and get your name out there? Like, it seems like it's this big deal to kind of break through, and you've done that. What would you give advice to someone who wants to start out doing something like that? How would you go about doing that?
Well, the main thing is you have to read. First of all, before you're a writer, you have to be reading on a regular basis, which is something that thankfully, because of the way my parents raised me, I did a lot of reading on my own, and then that they instructed me to do. And then I enjoy reading too, because I like information. So especially when it came to rap, I was able to marry those two things of like, I love learning things, which I got from reading, but then I also love reading about rap. So boom, I was able to combine those two. So that's the first step. And when I say,
makes it easy, right? When you like the subject matter.
Yes. And when I say read, I don't mean reading the captions on Instagram posts. Read books, read articles, read different things that are longer that give you creative context, but also make you think as you're reading them. They're critically challenging you, and that's really going to help. But then the other thing is you have to really, if you do want to get to become a writer, you have to really want to be a writer. And when I say that, not like kind of want to be a writer or I hope to be a writer, you have to really work, because now when I was growing up and when the three of us were growing up, there were hundreds of media outlets that you could try to get a job at as a 9-to-5 job, or you could freelance. And I was fortunate enough to come up when I was able to do both, often simultaneously. But the reality is those jobs are far harder to get and fewer and far between compared to when we were growing up. So you have to really want to do it. And then, like most things, you have to love it to the point where, at least initially, of course, you do it for free. And sometimes you're going to need to do it for free in order to get opportunities. And that's
a really good point, man. I wish we could hammer that home to a lot of kids. Not that, you gotta work for free necessarily, but I mean, you gotta pay your dues. You gotta build the chops and put the work in. And I think, we live in this society that's very, very quick to saying, I'm entitled to have this job right out of school. And it's really not that way, And Dennis, I mean, you could probably speak, all sorts of volumes on that, with what you do every day.
You got to put in the work. If you don't put in the work, I love the idea that you it's something that just didn't come naturally to you. And that you're on the grind, hustle. And then there's the other side of it. You have to build connections. You have to build a level of trust with the individuals that you're working with. And as a writer that started in '94, something that's just glossed over a lot, you began during the print media era.
Right.
You worked at Source, worked at Hip Hop DX, and everybody, and I'm sure artists wanted their articles in that print magazine in the store, and then it transitions to digital, and it's almost like where all of a sudden we've switched to streaming. What has that transition been like, and has it been tough? Was that a tough transition for you?
Yeah, the transition was very tough for me because I grew up reading magazines and newspapers. That was something I thoroughly enjoyed. Beyond the reading, I also like seeing the pictures because you were able to hold the picture or put it up on your wall, all these different things. But the thing that I really enjoyed about it was, generally speaking, these things were written by people that knew how to write and that could write well. By the time we get to fast forward a decade or so, and you get into the blog era and the digital world and all these different things, that's out the window. Like, people don't have any journalistic chops or even care to be accurate. And this is something that has always perplexed me. And we see it, I think, it's exacerbated now, and it's grown exponentially, that people don't care if they're wrong. They just have an opinion about a fact, or they'll say, well, that's not right because I don't believe that. Well, just to use an example, if Illmatic is not the first album to use multiple producers, then it's not. It's not whether it's the best one to do it or the first best one, but it wasn't the first. So a lot of people think it is, but it's not. It's a Big Daddy thing by Big Daddy Kane, came out 5 years before it. For instance, Big Daddy Kane produced on it, Marley Marl produced on it, Teddy Riley produced on it, Prince Paul produced on it, Easy Mo Bee produced on it, and DJ Mr. C. That's 6 producers. That's more than one. And all of those at the time, or most of those at the time, were known producers, and then they all grew into being these huge ones. So just as promote when Illmatic was coming out and the promotion behind it, that's a phenomenal album. It's brilliant. It's one of the best rap albums ever made. But to then, the journalists to then promote that it was the first rap album done like that is just grossly inaccurate. And that's the thing. Like, I would ask people about that. Like, that's not true, but it is because I read it here, or because I heard this, or this person said it. And I said, I don't care who said it. It's not true. And that's the challenging thing moving into the digital world, because in the print world, nobody's perfect. So everybody makes mistakes. And growing up, reading the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun in particular, when they made a mistake, they would put a correction. And they would say, on our article 2 days ago, we said Nas worked with this person, but Nas actually didn't work with this person. They worked with that person. So there was a sense of accountability in a mistake, as opposed to moving in the digital world. It was just, well, what's your opinion? Even if it's grossly misinformed, uninformed, or dramatically inaccurate. And that was really hard for me to comprehend, because there were levels when you work at a magazine or a newspaper. The writer writes it, then there's an editor, there's a copy editor. It goes through 3 or 4 sets of eyes. And generally speaking, again, mistakes happen. I make mistakes all the time, but through that process, there's a strong likelihood that either you, the writer, rereading it, the editor reading it, the copy editor reading it, somebody's going to catch this mistake, or at least there's a good likelihood. And once you got into the blogs where it's self-published, or it's just, as people know, a lot of clickbait or sensationalism, like, that's out the window. They don't care if this is true or not true. They just want to say something that, well, now I got 6 million hits, so I don't care if I'm right or wrong because people are watching me. Well, I'd rather get 2 million and be right, but that's me.
Soren, when you write an article, and as a journalist, do you read the comments? Do you, as a journalist, and now the opportunity that we didn't have with print media, where individuals have the reader has an opportunity to comment on articles, do you read those comments, or do you stay away from those?
No, I read them, absolutely, because sometimes I make a mistake and I want to learn from my mistakes or realize my mistakes. And then the ones that are, just bozos, like, I just laugh at them because it's clown material, so I laugh at clowns. So I try to learn and get better when I read the comments. But if it's somebody that's just trying to irritate me or saying something foolish or racist or whatever, I just laugh it off, because I've been aware and dealing with that the majority of my life. So it's not something that's unprecedented for me. So I don't take it personally. I think it's funny most of the time if it's negative, or some people are just funny. But sometimes, and I know I make mistakes, so I want to learn. And I also want to learn who do they want me to interview? What would they have wanted me to ask? Yeah. Because I want to get better at what I do. I want to be the best interviewer I can be. I want to be the best rap interviewer. I want to be the best interviewer, period. And that's why I read the comments, because they're like, oh man, I wish you would have asked this. And maybe I did in a different segment of the interview, or part 1 of the interview that they didn't watch yet. Or maybe I didn't ask them. And let me tuck that away for next time. So I find it very valuable to read the comments, and I really enjoy it.
Bob, I'm sitting there thinking, we have one of the top journalists out there in the hip-hop industry, connected with everyone, and is one of my favorite journalists. I've read so many of your articles, I've read all your books, and you're telling the viewer that you can always improve and get better. This is about apex lifestyles, and along the way, we're talking about reaching your apex. And earlier, you and I, we had a general conversation before we hopped on, and you're like, man, I'm nowhere near my apex, and I'm always trying to go for it. Are those the obstacles that you're talking about along the way, like making a mistake and looking to improve upon it? Is that part of the journey in being the best journalist in what you do?
For me, it is, for sure. I want to always improve, because the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure all my facts are correct. So that's usually the first thing that I always, like, it could have been written better. Okay, fine. It could have been written with more flair. Okay, fine. But as long as baseline, what I said is accurate, is to me the most important, then, you can build on the other things all the time. But the other thing is foundational. It needs to be done 99.999% of the time. But yes, I'm always looking at ways to write better, to think better, to interview someone better, to think of a question they've never been asked. That's one of the great things that a lot of artists, even ones I interview today, that I either had never interviewed or never met, or just had never come across, a lot of them still say to me, and these are dudes that have been making music since the 80s or early 90s, like, man, nobody's ever asked me these questions, man, this is great. And that's something that, keeps me going, because I want to learn as much as I can about this stuff and apply it to not only these interviews, but my next round of interviews, my next book, my next documentary I want to do, my next film I'm trying to make, all these different things. So I'm always trying to learn and get better, and I feel that drive and that hunger keeps me striving to get to the #1 spot for unique access, for myself as a writer, as an author, as a collaborator, as a person. That's just something I do because, we all make mistakes all day, every day. I just try to limit them and not repeat them.
Dennis, one of the things I love about this forum that we built is we get to speak with some of the top people in the world, really. I mean, and we got this unbelievable guest here with Soren. I mean, it's been a pleasure to pick your brain a little bit, and man, you're one of the best out there, and you can tell you're just never quite satisfied. And I think that's very impressive to me, and it's very inspirational. Dennis and I are new to this whole interviewing thing, so we're going to take these tips, and we kind of picked your brain a little bit today, so I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And man, thank you so much for coming in, man. It's just like a total honor for me. I'm learning the hip-hop world a little bit. Dennis is kind of introducing me to it. I'm more of a rock and roll guy, but man, it has been an amazing journey, and it's been amazing to talk to you today. I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thank you, Bob and Dennis, for having me. I really appreciate it, and sending you guys continued success too. Got a lot of great interviews and making it happen yourself. So Apex is the way to be. Try to keep going and growing.
Soren, you're the best, but you know what? Before we go, I want to try something with you. I have Soren Baker on that is just had some of the most amazing interviews. I'm a hip-hop head like you, and I've lived hip-hop as a basketball player and things like that. I want to give you some names of some artists, and I want to hear what comes to you. Tell me a word or two, because you're the wordsmith that comes to your mind to describe that artist, okay?
All right.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into each decade and go from there. You ready?
Yep.
Houdini.
Melody.
EPMD.
Funk.
Yeah, they brought the funk.
Yeah, for sure.
Soren, I'm going to drop it right now. My favorite hip-hop group of all time, Tribe Called Quest.
I would say Fun Brotherhood.
Yeah. Public Enemy.
I would say Forward Thinking.
Lil Durk.
Wild.
Yeah. XXX Tentacion.
Amazingly talented.
And we're going to jump into the 508. Joyner Lucas.
Say Unheralded.
He's unbelievable.
He's very talented.
Unbelievable. No, he just had Joyner Fest out here in Worcester, Massachusetts, and brought amazing artists together. If you have not had the chance, you have to watch him perform. It is it's an art itself. Everything that he pulls together, just absolutely tremendous. So
I need to check him out. I haven't seen him, unfortunately.
Oh, unbelievable. Who do we need to look out for? I mean, you're in the inside. Can you give me 2 or 3 artists that are coming out that we may not know about yet?
Who do we need to look out for?
Yeah.
Well, that's always a good question, but I would say some of the people that are, I mean, my favorite person that's quote unquote younger, even though he's been out now for a long time, is Vince Staples. Huge fan of Vince Staples. An older artist or a legacy artist that's coming back that never really got his shine is Dazzy D. He put out, even this year, he's got an album called The Reslaps that I really like. Let me think of some other quote unquote Friz out of LA area is really good. I like. I think Isaiah Rashad doesn't get a lot of as much attention as he could at times. I think people of our era that are a little older really didn't look at or appreciate Juice WRLD. So I know it's a little older now, but the Legends Never Die album by Juice WRLD I think is very good. Another person, of course, he's been around for a while, is Metro Boomin. But I'm saying this more for people that are older that don't listen to as much of stuff that's current. And I think too,
Metro Boomin's coming out here to Boston, and I think it's in August.
Well, I had the fortune to write about him. Red Bull did a symphony performance with him in Los Angeles last year, and I got to write about it and cover it for Red Bull, and it was a brilliant performance. So his music, I think, is amazing, and I definitely think from the older people like our age or even 10 years younger than us that didn't pay attention or don't listen to his sonics, that they're really missing out. I think he's a great producer, and he's on the trajectory to be a great producer in the pantheon of the greats, but he's all in his way.
Absolutely correct. Thank you for playing along. You know, you're, like I said, you're somebody that you're in the know, you're connected, and it's great to hear your insights. And in particular, I really enjoyed how you described each artist. It's really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, Soren, how can people reach out and follow you and connect with you? If you could give us like a litany of that'd be fantastic for the listeners.
Sure. You can follow me on all social media at Soren Baker, just my name, SorenBaker. And then please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Unique Access ENT, Unique Access Entertainment on YouTube. And that's also the same for all social media for that channel as well. And of course, subscribing to YouTube is free, so please do that, because I do want to get to be the #1 spot in the game. I get a lot of people in the comments referring to what Bob, you and Dennis were asking me about earlier about reading the comments. A lot of people are like, oh man, you should be big, you should be #1, or you're one of our favorites, and this and that. So I need to get the subscribers and the views and all that up to that level so that I can feel as though that is becoming closer to reality.
Yeah, your engagement I saw was really great. I mean, like Soren says, it doesn't cost anything to subscribe. Subscribe to Soren Baker, subscribe to Apex Lifestyles, and make sure you hit the notification bell. That helps out a lot too. And yeah, thank you so much, man. This has been an awesome one. And Dennis, like what else can I say, really?
Soren, you're one of the best. Like I said, I've been following you for years, and the work of art that you put out in your books, and I share them with my students, and you're educating so many people about a genre that's been so important to me and is so important to many individuals. So thank you for all you do. And you are someone, like you said, you're still going for your apex. You say you're hitting your apex in so many facets of life. Keep going. Keep grinding, man.
Well,
pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you both for having me. And yeah, it's all about hitting the apex. Everybody listening and watching, life, it doesn't stop until it ends. So you just got to keep striving to get better at everything you do all the time. That's something I try to do. Obviously, I'm not successful at it all the time, but it's definitely my goal.
Well, you're doing it more often than most people on the planet, man. So kudos to you. And yeah, it's been awesome. And, Dennis, as always, I guess, you take us home, man.
It's go time.